Welcome to BizTech's Community Conversation Show. Now, today's special show is part of our partnership with the 2022 Merdeka Award. The Merdeka Award Trust was established by Petronas and Shell in 2007 to recognize and reward excellent individuals and organizations whose works and achievements have not only contributed to the nation's growth, but also inspired greatness in the people of Malaysia. Now, our guest today is Dato Dr. Annabel K. Gallop, Head Curator for Indonesian and Malay Affairs in the South and Southeast Asia Department of the British Library. Now, Annabel is a historian renowned for her outstanding contributions in scholastic research, curation, archiving, and preservation of ancient Malay letters and manuscripts, Malay seals, and documents that have led to the understanding of the Malay language as the language of trade and diplomacy throughout the Malay archipelago, and the illumination of the rich heritage of the Malay world. Now, with all of that, welcome to the show, Annabel.
Thank you very much, Brian. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here.
Now, Annabel, for a start, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you stumbled upon Malay studies?
Yes, of course. Well, I'm half Malaysian by blood. My mother is Malaysian Chinese. She comes from a very small village in Kedah called Changlun. You might have heard of it. It's a village right on the border.
Yeah, it's the last village before
the
Thailand.
last village before Thailand. And my grandfather had a shop house there in Pekan Lama, Changlun. So that's my background. My father is English, so I'm literally half English, half Malaysian Chinese. But I was brought up in Brunei, Darussalam, where my parents were working. And when I was at school, I was quite good at sciences. And, in those old days, we had two streams, the science stream and the art stream. And I was always in the science stream. I did maths for my first degree. But it was only after that that I really discovered that my passion lay in Malay and Indonesian matters. And so I changed tack completely. I went back to university. I did a master's in Indonesian and Malay studies at London University, the School of Oriental and African Studies. And that really set me on the course for the rest of my life, because I just loved what I was studying. And I've been privileged and lucky enough to have a job which allows me to constantly delve and explore in that amazing field.
Now, I want to find out a little bit. I think the audience would be very interested to find out around the level of interest in Indonesian and Malay studies globally, because Malay studies as an ethnic study or Indonesian studies is not as popular as, say, African studies or Chinese studies has been. Is that necessarily the case today?
I think it was probably true some decades ago, and traditionally it was always, Malay studies was always interpreted in a very narrow field of studying Malay literature, perhaps, and everyone knows of famous works like the Hikayat Hang Tuah, Sejarah Melayu, and not much else. I think the wonderful thing now is that with technological advantages, with digitization, with social media, everyone with a deep interest in who they are and where they live, their identity, is able to explore this and find historical sources that sort of speak to them personally. Maybe, I have to confess, in all my career, I have not come across a Malay manuscript from Changlun, but wherever you live, I think you can probably search out historical documents that actually help to throw light on what's made you, where you are from. And so that's what I've loved about my work. I think, to me, the key sort of upskilling moment was when I learned to read Jawi at university. I learned it in London at SOAS. My teacher was Dr. Russell Jones. He was a lecturer at SOAS, but he used to be a customs officer in Malaysia, and he knew Malay and Jawi very well. And I think whether it's Malay that you have to read, or Chinese characters, or Tamil script, because these are all important languages for studying Malaysian history, learning to read historical documents, that's what's really gives you the immediacy of connecting with history. And so it's through reading Malay. My speciality is Malay and Malay manuscripts written in Jawi. And it's a wonderful feeling when you open a manuscript which might be 100 to 300 years old, and by reading it, you feel you're able to connect directly to the person who produced it, whether they might have been in Malacca or Pahang or in Sumatra or Java, centuries ago. So that's what constantly drives me and my interest. And I think with all the new technology, it is now possible to connect directly between the discovery of such documents and the people to whom they mean the most, which is often the local communities where those manuscripts might have been produced.
Now, one of the key things is also the fact that, as you said, we now, with technology, realize that we need to look at things from a different lens. And one of the things is in terms of the Malays and how pervasive the Malay language was across Southeast Asia, in fact, globally, everyone's looking at it in a very different light, isn't it? Because essentially, there were Malays in South Africa, the Cape Malays, who are still there, Sri Lankan Malays as well, and across the Southeast Asian archipelago.
Yeah, so I think, the Malay is an amazing brand. It's a global brand. But with that, you have to accept that, by embracing this and promoting and being proud of the global reach of the brand, you have to embrace diversity as well, because that there are Malays of who speak every local language, of every religion, of every ethnic and tradition and regional traditional group, different with reflecting different ways of doing things, different foods, different different customs, but they're all linked by this by a language which enables them to communicate, whether you're in South Africa or in Mindanao or in Malacca. And so so Malay is a great reach, but you have to accept that with that reach comes diversity and different ways of being Malay as well. But that's why when I work it with Malay manuscripts, and when you open a Malay manuscript, it could be of a very wonderful tale that many people know. It could be a syair or a hikayat, one of the very famous Islamic tales like Hikayat Nabi Yusuf, the story of Yusuf. But you cannot tell where the manuscript comes from. It could come from Sri Lanka, it could come from Java, maybe it comes from Brunei or Kalimantan or from Pahang. So but it's a shared heritage. And so this is actually, it shouldn't be seen as something to shy away from. It's actually a wonderful strength and something to be proud of. And it really shows the global reach of Malayness.
Now, one of the important work that you've really been doing is digitizing old manuscripts, really to preserve them and then obviously allow them to be enjoyed across a wider audience. Tell us a little bit about this and this process and how you go about doing it and who do you partner with in order to get these things done?
Yes, these are all really, thank you. You've picked up on all the different important elements of the process, Brian. So all libraries, I work in the British Library, which is the National Library of the UK, the equivalent of the Perpustakaan Negara, or in Malaysia, or the National Library of Singapore. And of course, we are a traditional library. We have books, manuscripts, we have newspapers. People come to our buildings and read our books. And for centuries, that was the way people interacted with libraries. You would come there, pick up a physical book and read it. But with digitization, it enables us to reach. It's been a complete game changer in my professional life, because it enables us to bring our collections to people all over the world freely and wherever you are, with nothing more than a smartphone or a computer screen. But because libraries all over the world have to do everything else as well, all their traditional tasks, and as well as digitization, funding has always been a big issue. And so in order to digitize collections, we have to seek funds externally, as it's not something that can be completely paid for by government funds, taxpayers' money within the library itself. And very often we turn to the private sector, and both to trusts and companies, but also to very generous and enlightened individuals. And so it might come as a surprise to some of your audience in particular to know that the British Library's complete collection of Malay manuscripts has been digitized thanks to a couple of American bankers, William and Judith Bollinger, who for some years were resident in Singapore with their company. And they have this wonderful belief of giving where you live. So since they were based in Singapore, at the very heart of the Malay world, they decided to give money for a project which would benefit the local community. And so they funded the digitization of the Malay manuscripts in the British Library in collaboration with the National Library of Singapore. Now that enabled us to digitize, we have about 120 Malay manuscripts, not that many, but there are some very important titles, to fully digitize them and to make them completely freely accessible on the internet. So wherever you are in the world, you could decide, I'm going to read the Hikayat Hang Tuah tonight. And you call up the British Library's copy on your screen and you practice your Jawi, brush up your Jawi, and you read it from page to page. But I have to say that, you know, this is, on the one hand, this is absolutely wonderful. You could say that's all you need to do. You just digitize the material, put it up there. But actually, it's such a, as you know, it's such a crowded digital universe. It's not enough just to do something. You have to reach out to your audience and tell them it's there. Make it easy for them to connect to you. And that's where social media comes in. And I think, you know, the value of our digitization program would be perhaps 1% of what it is without all the benefits of social media to connect. So I write blogs about the manuscripts we digitize, and then I promote the blogs through Facebook and now increasingly also Twitter, giving people direct links, and that is how we connect mostly with our Malaysian and Indonesian audiences, and it enables the program to have a bigger impact than it would do otherwise.
And so, Annabel, I see a huge opportunity here for Malaysian corporations to get involved and accelerate this process by funding and partnering with you to do different things.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think that, I mean, the British Library, I think sometimes it surprises people because it is, you know, it's one of the great libraries of the world. It's a very well-known library, but our collection of Malay manuscripts is very small. There are 120, and now, thankfully, thanks to the Bollingers, they are all digitized. But in the National Library of Malaysia, Perpustakaan Negara, there are nearly 5,000 manuscripts. So that gives you some idea of, you know, of the difference in scale. So in Malaysia, you know, and in local museums and libraries and university libraries, there are large numbers of manuscripts just waiting to be shared. So absolutely, there's always more that can be done.
Annabel, you've done really exciting stuff, obviously. Under the radar, perhaps for many years, but now people are recognizing it. In your opinion, what are some of the accomplishments that you're most proud of, and why is that?
I think, to be honest, the things that I feel happiest about looking back over the work I've done is that when I studied at university, when I did my master's in Indonesian and Malay studies, we were taught the same things as anyone studying Malay, whether you're studying in Leiden or in Kuala Lumpur or in Singapore. You know, the same text we were studying the Sejarah Melayu, Hikayat Hang Tuah, Tufat al-Nafis, and people will know these great works. But in my own work, since I you know, been working at British Library, I've tried to find fields which have not been studied before, and which nobody's ever looked at before. And so I did my PhD on Malay seals. So these are the seals which—
Yes, I read that, yes.
Yeah, sultans and high officials used to stamp on their letters to, you know, it's just like a name card today. It would give your name, your title, the date, and they're often very beautiful. You know, they were made by silversmiths, goldsmiths working in the palace. They're sometimes beautifully decorated, and it's an aspect of Malay writing culture which had never been studied before. So that's what I've really enjoyed doing, is to discover something which has not been studied, and to say to people, wow, isn't this just amazing? And look how much historical information you can get out of these tiny little marks that you just find on a manuscript document. So that's the type of field I study. Recently, I've been studying illuminated Qur'an manuscripts from Southeast Asia. So Qur'an manuscripts, of course, it's the very heart of Islam, the religious, you know, of religious manuscripts, and the text is, of course, the same as it ever was, ever since it was revealed, you know, through the Prophet Muhammad. But the decoration of the manuscripts is completely different everywhere in the world. So you can tell a Malay Qur'an manuscript immediately just from the visual appearance, and it's different from an Egyptian one or an Ottoman or a Turkish or a Persian one. And so that's the field I'm currently working on, and it's a very exciting, and it's a very new field. It had not been looked at in detail before the past 10-20 years, and so that's a very exciting field also.
So, Annabel, one of the things that keeps coming back is the fact that obviously there's a lot more to be studied. There's a lot of gaps of study in the fields of study of Malay studies and Malay culture. What is the local centers of excellence like for Malay studies in Malaysia?
Well, in Malaysia, it's always been, of course, you know, the University Malaya, UKM, USM, the top universities have always had Malay studies departments. And also Dewan Bahasa has always been a pioneer, and it has a very good collection of manuscripts as well. And then increasingly the libraries and museums themselves, so the National Library, Perpustakaan Negara, and the state museums and libraries and the archives, you know, National Archives of Malaysia, have always done wonderful work. But what I'm really excited about is that whereas they used to almost, you could say, have a monopoly on this production of knowledge, is they're now complemented by very exciting initiatives in the from individuals and in the private sector. Which is enabled again by social media and digital platforms, which enables networking and people to bring up discoveries in a way which is not possible before. So just to give you one example, one of the Malay manuscripts, which was digitized by the British Library in our program, it caused quite a furore in Malaysia when it became known, because this is a Malay manuscript written in 1775, and the title is Hikayat Raja Babi, so the tale of the pig king. And this is written in Malay, in Jawi script, and people were astonished. How could you have a Malay tale about a pig king? And the answer is, of course, because it was his bad luck, his misfortune, for a prince to be born in the form of a pig, because his father behaved badly and he treated an old woman who was a witch very badly, and so she cursed the queen who was pregnant, and their son was born in the form of a pig. He had lots of adventures and he had to fight, and at the end there's a happy ending. He re-emerges in the form of a prince. So it's a typical, if you like, a romance, an adventure story. But this became so popular, it created such a lot of interest in Malaysia that actually it was digitized by the British Library. It was picked up by an independent publisher, Fiksi, a very big Malaysian publisher, who advertised on Facebook for a Malay scholar to transliterate the text from Jawi to Rumi, and published it completely independently. So that's the kind of initiatives that are going on in parallel with the traditional library, museum, archive, university sector. And that's what's really exciting. I find that there are individuals and small enterprises who are also becoming involved in knowledge production in this way.
Now, Annabel, how about globally? Are they centers of excellence, perhaps the School of African and Oriental Studies? Is there a department there, or perhaps somewhere in the US where there are centers of excellence focusing on Malay and Indonesian studies?
Yes, there's quite a lot of sort of shifts and eddies and currents. So for example, at SOAS, on the one hand, that where I studied, you know, where I'm very much linked to in London, on the one hand, there's been certainly a decline. So the wonderful degree that I did, the Masters in Indonesian and Malay Studies, which was my passport, so to speak, to my job, no longer exists. You can't do a Masters in Indonesian and Malay Studies. But just at the moment, at SOAS has become a major center, also thanks to a Malaysian senior lecturer, Dr. Mulaika Hijaz, who has been awarded a £1 million research grant to set up a project on manuscript libraries of Sumatra. So studying Malay manuscripts from different centers in Sumatra, from Aceh, from West Sumatra, and from Palembang, which will really, and that's going to be a 3 to 5 year research project, which will really so there are more experts on Malay manuscripts being gathered in London for that project, including PhD students, than for many years. The Netherlands used to be quite a center, but I have to say its moment has passed. And Germany, there's much more happening in Germany now, in Hamburg, at centers in Berlin and in Frankfurt also, where there are lecturers in Malay. There's a teaching of Malay, Professor Arntgraf in Frankfurt, Jan van der Putten in Hamburg, and with students as well. And in the US, there are many different studies. But again, I think the great thing is that in this digitally connected world, you will find that you can have, a single Like in Tokyo, for example, there's also a constant interest in Malay studies there. And people are finding it much easier to network and to work together, even if you're only like one lecturer in one university in the middle of the United States. You can connect with colleagues in Malaysia, in Indonesia, in Singapore. And so it's much less of a problem than it used to be.
Now, Annabel, you have so much passion for this field. How have you been able to sustain that over the years?
But I think because, you know, the world of Malay history, Malay manuscripts is so exciting. There's always something new to do. I honestly feel if I had 3 lives again, I would still find new material to work on. And it's the fact there's always something new to do that's been so exciting for me. As I said, I worked on Malay letters. Thanks to one of my dearest mentors was the late lamented Dato Zakia Hanum Noor, who was the Director General of the National Archives of Malaysia. And I've never managed to be, I've been always so grateful that she entrusted me with producing an exhibition for the National Archives of Malaysia for Archive Negara. And the exhibition was called Warisan Warka Melayu, the Legacy of the Malay Letter, back in 1994. And that was really put the spotlight on how Malay letters were used to connect all parts of the world. And so I used to work on Malay letters, and I worked on Malay seals. Now I'm working on Qur'an manuscripts and illumination. There are so many, I would say that would be my message, that there are so many unstudied topics. You can make them your own. You can make great discoveries. That's the wonderful thing about Malay, about Malay studies. It's not like everything has been studied already. No, you can really make an impact.
Annabel, it's been a fascinating conversation, and I really enjoyed and I learned a lot as well. But any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
Yes, I think because I'm so grateful to have been given this wonderful Merdeka Award, and what I hope it will do is just bring to the fore of people's minds the recognition of the value of this wonderful heritage that we all enjoy. I mean, I am the curator for Malay and Indonesian at the British Library, but in terms of Malaysia's history, we have wonderful records also in Chinese, Tamil, Arabic, and English, and don't forget it, Dutch and Portuguese. So these are all the languages which will open doors to historical records, which will enrich our understanding of history. You need them all. I work on Malay, but I collaborate with others who work on all these different languages, and you need them all to gain a richer understanding of the history of Malaysia. So I would just say I'm so grateful for this award, because hopefully it shines a light on everyone. Everyone wants to know where they come from, how they got there, and what their heritage means to them. And that's what history and historical materials can give us.
Annabel, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Brian.
I'm Brian Fernandez, and we've been speaking to Dato Dr. Annabel Gallop, Head Curator for Indonesian and Malay Affairs in the South and Southeast Asia Department of the British Library, on BizTech's Community Conversation Show. This show is in partnership with the 2022 Merdeka Awards. This video and podcast will be on our social media platforms, as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. This will also be on our syndicated partner websites, TV stations, and radio stations. Please subscribe and like our various platforms. Thanks again for tuning in.